So I'd like to start tonight with this quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi. Some of you may know Bhikkhu Bodhi he's one of the key figures in this tradition. I think he's from the Bronx or Brooklyn or something like this. He has a little bit of an accent, and Bhikkhu Bodhi is his ordination name. He was ordained, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, and he lived for decades in Sri Lanka as a practitioner, as a monk, and he's conservative, and he's also the primary translator of the texts that we have today. He's quite a remarkable person. Really, I have so much respect for him. His translations, as well as just his writings, I think are fantastic. But, he's a monk, and as part of the rules for monastics in this tradition is they don't drive. If they want to go somewhere, somebody else has to drive them. And they also don't handle money. And they have all these restrictions on their lifestyle to keep their lifestyle really simple, really simple. And also to have it that they have this relationship with the non-monastics, so that the monastics aren't sequestered off doing their own thing, but they rely on a relationship with others to go to the doctors or, anything like this kind of stuff. So. But Bhikkhu Bodhi, so somebody who probably hasn't driven, I don't know how old he is. It's conceivable, maybe 50 years, 40 years, something like this. And then he says, the mind is like a drunken driver. I don't know why, I just kind of get this kick out of this idea of somebody who doesn't drive, but to recognize that he's pointing to that sometimes drunken drivers of course, they want to go down the middle of the lane, like we all do. But when you have this drunkenness, you kind of find yourself swerving and going a little to the side, maybe hit a car, or nearly miss a car, hopefully. And then you'll go, maybe off the edge of the road, and then this way and that way. And so in this way, that there's this, he's pointing to how the mind, we kind of wish that we would go the direction we want it to go, that there would be this kind of in the middle, not getting pulled one direction or the other. But this recognition that often we are having this craving, we're getting pulled towards something over here, or maybe we have some aversion, we want to get rid of something over there, so we're kind of going this way, and this anything but going down kind of like the center of the lane. And sometimes this craving or this longing is for something that was in the past, doesn't even exist. Or maybe we have this craving of something in the future. That doesn't exist either, right? The only thing that really exists is this moment. So this idea that the mind is kind of careening back and forth, being pushed around, even though there's this wish to be going down the middle. So equanimity is this quality that enables the mind, that lets the mind go down the middle of the lane, not careening from one side to the next, not leaning from one side to the next. And one Pali word for equanimity is tatramajjata. I like saying that word. I don't expect anybody to know how to spell it or even to repeat it. But if we were to translate it into English, literally it means standing in the middle. So this idea of equanimity, of being able to stand in the middle. So it's pointing to this stability or this steadiness or this sense of balance or unshakability. We're just staying here, going this direction, not getting pushed around. So it's this strong sense of inner balance that might come from what we might say like a ballast, a heavy thing that's preventing the mind from getting off course. Tetramajatata is one Pali word that gets translated as equanimity, but there's a second word that also gets translated as equanimity into English, and this word is upekkha. Upekkha. And this word is more about seeing clearly or seeing the bigger picture or something about this. So this idea of equanimity, not only is there standing in the middle, but there's a steadiness or this balance that comes from, like perhaps in the same way you might be on a hill where you have a view and maybe you can see things that you can't quite see when you're like in the midst of it. From the hillside, maybe you can see things in the distance that are about to arrive. If you were there, you wouldn't be able to see them yet. But if you're on the hill and you see, then you're not surprised when whatever it is that arises, when it's coming in the distance. It's like, oh yeah, of course this is here. So this equanimity is being able to see the bigger picture, but it also has this quality of this even-minded acceptance of ourselves, of others, of whatever is arising. Not getting pushed around by craving or aversion. Another way of saying that is a certain amount of acceptance, like, yes, this is how it is right now. I'm not going to demand or insist that it be otherwise. This is how it is. But it's not this resignation, like, oh, okay, I'll just wait until this ends, until something better arises. Instead, it's this acceptance that grows out of a respect for ourselves, respect for others, a respect for all the kind of like the conditions that come together that makes whatever is happening right now happen. But things don't happen magically, of course not. There's reasons. And so this kind of respect that even though we don't know all the reasons, this recognition that there are reasons for why things are happening. Right now you're hearing my voice, most likely. Maybe there's so many reasons for this. One is that maybe it's because I have a microphone. It required somebody to invent microphones, required IMC to decide that they wanted microphones, to purchase them. It required Svet over here to push the right buttons to make sure that the voice is going out. It required me to have this idea that I wanted to speak and that I had breath in my lungs that I could put through vocal cords. And we could go on and on and on. So equanimity is part of this respect, this acknowledgement that there's so many things that come together to make everything happen. And so it's this recognition that we don't have to take it so personally. It doesn't mean that we're a good person or a bad person or that it's always going to be this way or all these stories that we like to make. Of course we do. Human beings do this. Just this recognition, it's just this coming together of all these different conditions supports this equanimity. So part of the reason why I'm talking about equanimity tonight is because I'm continuing this series on the 7 factors of awakening. These factors of awakening are these qualities of the mind and heart that really create the conditions in which awakening can occur. And we can think about awakening in so many different ways. We can think about it one way is just this increase in freedom, this increase in peace, increase in well-being. You can also thinking about it, what the Buddha taught is, there's these certain attainments of awakening when there's this radical letting go that allows a shift, a permanent shift in one's perspective. And with this letting go, there's much more equanimity available after this letting go. But equanimity is the 7th factor of the 7 factors of awakening, so it's the last one. Just quickly, I'll list the other 6. There's mindfulness, and then there's these energizing factors of investigation, energy, and joy. And then there's these calming factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And I'll continue in some other talks, like how these 7 all work together and how they're sequential and balance each other and all these kinds of things. But today I'd like to continue a little bit more with equanimity. So for some of us, when we hear this word, this equanimity, it certainly was not part of my vocabulary before I found these Buddhist teachings. It just sounds, I don't know, it doesn't sound very attractive. It sounds like, okay, whatever that is, it kind of sounds boring and dry and dull. Maybe something like this, but there might be a way in which it doesn't sound attractive because equanimity, it might feel like it's a type of disconnection, a way in which we're not present for what's happening in our lives or in the moment, or maybe it feels like it's a type of coldness or indifference. Or maybe it feels like it's a kind of grayness or aloofness. You might have some of these ideas about equanimity, but it's not. Equanimity has this quality of this vitality and this openness and spaciousness and warmth. It's the not having to be removed from life, not having to be removed from our connections with other people, not having to be removed from what's being experienced, but having this, be able to have some steadiness or stability no matter what's happening. It's kind of this radical idea that there might be so many things that happens, that so many things, in our external conditions, the news, what others are telling us or not telling us, or maybe there's inner conditions, maybe we don't feel well, maybe we have a disease, an illness. What a beautiful idea that we don't have to be careening off course or into some territory that we know isn't good for us or supportive for us when these conditions change. But having said all this, part of equanimity or practicing with equanimity is this kind of like slide into indifference. I would say that this is what happens, is that sometimes we want to disconnect because it feels uncomfortable or painful. And so sometimes it tips over into indifference. And I love this so much about the Buddhist teachings, that, this is how we learn. Oh yeah, this is indifference. I feel kind of closed down. I don't have a sense of vitality. I don't have a sense of contentment. Instead, I feel maybe sad or tight or something like this. And so part of the way that we discover what equanimity is and how it's available for us and how it can show up, part of that is learning how it isn't. And so it's natural that humans fall into indifference on occasion. Maybe it's a lot, maybe it's only on occasion. But can we recognize that? And recognize that there's an alternative to stay connected, but still have this stability, this uprightness. But there's another reason why equanimity might sound unattractive. And that is, it's not uncommon to have this belief that's maybe, in the back of the mind, not in the front of the mind, but maybe there's somewhere in the back of our minds that we feel like in order to have some, juiciness in our lives, something that feels invigorating, we might feel like we have to have a certain amount of drama, a certain amount of, angst or or something like this, big, huge problems that have to get solved or something like this, right? So much of the kind of human experience is about like solving this problem and solving that problem and all these different problems. And so this idea of having some contentment and uprightness and this ballast, some steadiness, in some ways might feel a little frightening. Like, who would I be if I weren't the person that had all these problems that had to be solved? Or who would I be if I didn't have these emotional outbursts or difficulties? Who would I be? Would I just be gray and dull and boring? Would nobody like me? Would I just sit in the corner very quietly? So often, it sounds a little silly to say these things, and these thoughts certainly aren't in the front of our minds, but there might be a little bit in the back of our minds of, well, this is what it means to be human, to be alive, is to be filled with energy maybe that's born from anger or this wish to fix things if things aren't right, or this just wanting things to be otherwise. So equanimity might sound like that it's something that it's maybe a little bit frightening, a little bit dull, this fear that it might be dull, but there's this openness, this spaciousness, right? If you have this stability, then you don't have to protect yourself. And things that can arise can just just go right on through. We feel them, we acknowledge them, we know them, but we aren't being pushed by them. So this experience of equanimity, I'm talking about it like it's one singular thing, but in fact it's really a spectrum. I like this idea of spectrums instead of this binary on, off, either you got it or you don't. I don't know, it doesn't, because most often we feel like, oh, I don't got it, I don't have it. But this idea of a spectrum, to really having little stability, the slightest thing sends us off kilter, to having a lot of stability, right? There's this spectrum, and then this practice is just moving one direction towards greater and greater stability without insisting that anything less than that is somehow not enough. So it's not an on-off switch. It's a spectrum. And we might say that with equanimity is over here, maybe emotionality is on the other end of the spectrum. But a part of being human is having emotions. Of course it is. And it would be awful if somehow this teaching was about you can never have emotions again or something like that, or this thinking that we should have this staid demeanor all the time. So we can ask ourselves, do we have this, do we know both ends of this spectrum? Do we know what it's like to have emotions and to be sometimes overwrought, or to be gleeful, or And do we also know what it's like to be really steady? And to have this fullness, this richness, this vitality that's available with this rich emotional life and also with steadiness. And do we know how to maybe move back and forth, right? We don't want to be in equanimity if somebody in our family is really injured or hurt or emotionally hurt, right? We don't just want to be standing in this, this being stable. We want to connect with them. We want to have compassion, and maybe it breaks our heart to see their heart breaking. So can we practice in such a way that we are in contact with our emotions, not pretending that they're not there, having respect for them, but also recognizing that there's something else that's also available, equanimity in this life. There's emotionality, equanimity. Can we get to know both ends of the spectrum? Can we move from one end to the other when it's appropriate, when that's what life is asking of us at that moment? I appreciate this very much because it's not asking us to be different than we are. It's just asking us to maybe stretch or expand our capacity or our idea of what it means to be a human, or what it means to be a Buddhist practitioner, or what does it mean to be somebody who does mindfulness practice, or whatever it might be. So, equanimity, part of the, maybe I could say this, functions, is it just makes life easier to navigate. Maybe this goes without saying, right? If we recognize these two ends of the spectrum and we can move from one to the other, then we can respond to what's needed at any particular time. But not only that, we don't have to hide from difficulties. Having equanimity allows us to have confidence that, okay, whatever is going to arise, I can be with it, I can handle it. And it allows us to not be blown around by these 8 worldly winds. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. Maybe I'll unpack this at a later time at another talk, but tonight I'll just mention them. Something else I appreciate about the Buddha's teachings is that the Buddha is saying there is nobody who is immune from these 8 worldly winds. Nobody. Praise and blame. Sometimes we get praise, sometimes we get blame. Fame and disrepute. Sometimes we have a good reputation, and sometimes there's something bad that gets said about us, whether it's true or not, right? Sometimes this happens. Nobody is immune to this. Pleasure and pain, of course, right? We all have this. And then the last one, gain and loss. Of course, our life cannot just be gain, gain, gain without any loss. And just this recognition that all 8 of these, what's called winds, will blow in our lives. We don't get to have just the positive ones and completely avoid the negative ones. No matter how much we might wish that were so, of course we can't have that. So equanimity allows us to be able to have some steadiness when these different winds of our lives start blowing. And so another part of the one of the functions of equanimity is as a support for letting go. It's so much easier to let go of whatever it is we're holding on to if we have a sense of it's okay. I'm not off balance. I'm not out of kilter. Then we can let go. It seems, what comes to my mind is kind of like water skiing or something like this, right? When you're off balance, right, you're holding on so tightly. But there's a way in which sometimes maybe it's just best to let go and just kind of let go into the water instead of being pulled in a way that's unhelpful. There's this expression of kind of like rope burn, right? That you're just holding on so tightly and it just hurts because things change and we're holding on. So equanimity allows us to let go, not to get this rope burn. And of course, awakening, liberation, ease comes with letting go. I think we all know this, that clinging eventually leads to suffering. If not immediately, eventually it always leads to suffering, to difficulty. So to support our not clinging, equanimity helps us to let go. And so, how do we practice equanimity, or what are some supports for it to arise? And I'll just going to mention a little bit now, and I think in the talk that I'll give next week, I'll talk more about this. But one thing I wanted to say is that with equanimity, we start where we are. We start where we are, of course we do. Like, we can't start anywhere else, right? So we start where we are. And we begin by bringing equanimity to little things in life, small things. We don't have to do anything completely radical, but maybe, I know on retreat practice, or there's during retreats, the meals are served at buffet style, where there's these big platters or containers of food, and then there's a line. And maybe equanimity is saying, oh my goodness, this is my favorite. Maybe there's cookies or something. And like, well, maybe I'll just wait and make sure that everybody else gets one. And if there's still some, I'll come back and get one. Maybe equanimity is, something very simple like this. Letting the car in front of you get into the lane or something like this. And these really small things, really small. Starting with like the difficulties, if we think of difficulties on a scale of 1 to 10, like start with things that are like a 1 or a 2. And just kind of like let go, or practice kind of like some steadiness. Like, okay, I don't have to go towards this or get away from that. I can do whatever. I can practice some equanimity here, some steadiness. So don't underestimate how powerful this can be, even though I'm saying start with a 1 or a 2. There's a part of us that often thinks like, no. I really want equanimity, so I'm going to start with a 9. But usually it works best if we start where it's easy. Start where it's easy. And just get used to it. Just get used to this, and that we realize that how much confidence it gives us, and it's a good feeling to not to always be going after something or pushing away, but instead to have this steadiness. So, to kind of like talk about this, I would like to read this poem, this idea of starting where it's easy with equanimity. This poem is by Rosemary Traumer, and it's called Driving with My Son the Night Before His Driver's Test. We turn off the music, practice left turns onto the highway, park on the bias, park on the street, we get gas, drive backwards, use the median, change lanes, use the blinker, slow down, full stop. There's a rule for everything, and a comfort in knowing the rules. And you can practice everywhere, notes our DMV guidelines, so have at it. Imagine if we all practiced everywhere. If we all signaled before every turn of heart, turn of mind, turn of plans. Imagine if we all agreed, no matter where we're going and no matter where we've been, that we are all travelers on the same side, knowing we're on this road together. Imagine if we agreed to stop in an orderly way, no drama, no shaming, no blame, so that someone else might take their turn to go. Imagine getting along with others, no matter what they believe. Could it be as simple as keeping it steady? Looking over your shoulder, making eye contact in a crossing, giving each other some space. Imagine if we agreed to stop in an orderly way, no drama, no shaming, no blame, so that someone else might take their turn to go. Imagine getting along with others, no matter what they believe, could be as simple as keeping it steady, looking over your shoulder, making eye contact in a crossing, giving each other some space. This poem by Rosemary Traumer. Driving with my son the night before his driver's test. I appreciate this very much, her just kind of pointing to, like driving represents so many things, but just this idea of keeping it steady, keeping it in the middle of the lane, as Bhikkhu Bodhi says in the beginning there. So I'd like to stop there and open it up if there are some questions or comments. And if somebody's on YouTube and if they want to type in a question, they're welcome to do that too.
Oh, there's
Yep, okay, Ed.
When you say the spectrum of emotionality and equanimity, is there not a way that you have some emotion? You know, you could have a lot of strong emotion, but you don't allow it to take over. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, that's kind of what I'm pointing to. You know, sometimes in our lives, right, it does take over and we just collapse into our emotions. But there can be a way in which there's tears and like, okay, this is what sadness feels like, and there's a lot of sadness. But there's a certain not getting lost in it, but still really feeling it. And yeah. Of course, right? I mean, humans grieve when we have some losses, when dear ones die or something like this, right? Of course, there's going to be tears and something like this. Yeah. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment or a question? No requirements, but if you'd like.
My question is, how do we keep this from becoming a really easy way to absolve ourselves of responsibility for like broader like social responsibilities, if that makes sense? I can see it being very difficult for equanimity to become like a real like a problem very close to home, like in our like families, and there's like something happening. But I could see it really easily becoming a way for people just to say like, oh, well, like at 60,000 feet, like impermanence and things will change. And
Yeah, yeah. So equanimity is not indifference. It's often, it's easy to feel like it is, but instead it allows to feel like, oh, the pain of this social injustice, for all these things, and to really, to feel that and still be able to have contact with our greatest wisdom that allows us, okay, how can I make a difference? What can I do next? That comes from a place of wisdom and care, not from a place of fear or anger that's out of control or something like that. Is that helpful?
thank you.
Yeah, I certainly had this idea that it was about indifference too, because that was certainly the only thing that I knew. It was like you were either disconnected and aloof, or you're, for me before it was kind of like, or collapsed into. I didn't realize that there's something like a third alternative to be feeling and knowing what's happening and feel the pain and the sadness or whatever it might be, and still be present and be steady. Be available. And Sveta, is there maybe,
So we have a couple of questions here. Could you please say a little more about how the 8 winds are part of equanimity?
the 8 wings of equanimity?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How are they part of equanimity?
How are they?
Part of equanimity.
Part?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So equanimity is, part of the way it's defined is that it's the steadiness, this ballast, this stability when these 8 winds blow. So it's like it's not being pushed around by these 8 things. And part of that is equanimity is like, seeing the bigger picture. Well, part of the bigger picture is to recognize, of course, there is gain and loss, even though we only want gain, but loss is unavoidable. And of course we only want pleasure. We don't want pain, but pain is unavoidable. Fame, these are maybe clunky translations, but to have a good reputation or to have a bad reputation, right? There's always going to be somebody who's, displeased with us. Of course, it's impossible to avoid that. So that's part of how equanimity is seeing the bigger picture of that the negative things are going to happen and not being pushed around. When the negative things happen or when the positive things happen. Like when we have this good reputation, or maybe it is fame, maybe we get our fame, 15 minutes of fame or something, and not to think like, okay, I finally made it and now I don't have to take care of anything else in my life, or I don't know, whatever this is, just not to get out of balance with that. And was there another one?
There's a question about relationship between tranquility and equanimity.
Yeah, this is such a good question. Relationship between tranquility and equanimity. I would say tranquility is more of like a bodily experience, or it's definitely a settledness, but equanimity has this flavor of wisdom, like seeing the bigger picture, whereas tranquility is non-agitation and stability and settledness, I guess. So it is related. They're in the same family, but equanimity has this quality of wisdom, or, yeah, I'll use this word wisdom, of seeing the bigger picture and having this understanding of conditionality, whereas tranquility is more just about the settledness. This is a good question, and I'll talk about this more in a subsequent talk, the relationship between all these awakening factors. Is okay? Okay. Okay, well, or do you have?
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk, Diana. It triggered a number of things in me. I won't say them all, but one of them was I just recently watched the movie Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood
Oh,
about Mr. Rogers.
yeah. I
And-
haven't seen it, but
Yeah, and there's one scene in which he's comes into a family's home, and the father of the family is dying of cancer, and nobody's really talking about it. And he said something like, you know, death is part of life, and he said, and it's part of being human. And he said anything that's part of being human can be talked about, and anything that can be talked about can be managed. So that's what came up when you had been talking about that, facing anything.
yeah, I love this, Mr. Rogers. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers. Won't you be my neighbor? Yes, I love this. Thank you, Jim, for saying that. I'll have to see this. I meant to see it when it came out years ago. I didn't, so. I don't know, that just makes me smile thinking about Mr. Rogers. Okay, so maybe with that as an ending, just thank you for your kind attention and thank you for your practice. And may you have some equanimity in the upcoming days. Thank you.